Have you ever felt a desire inside you that you couldn't explain? Not just a passing thought or fantasy, but something deeper, something that doesn't quite fit the story you've told yourself about who you are. Maybe it stirs late at night when everything is quiet. Maybe it catches you off guard in the middle of the day. An image, a feeling, a pulse that leaves you wondering, where did that come from? You're not alone. Carl Jung, the great Swiss psychologist, believed that real transformation doesn't begin with what we show the world. It begins in the places we hide. He called it the shadow. And when it comes to our sexuality, the shadow isn't just dark, it's deeply human. It's not something to moralize, it's not something to pathologize, it's something to understand. Because buried beneath our most uncomfortable desires is often the key to our wholeness. Think about that. What if the part of yourself you've tried hardest to suppress, the part you've labeled as wrong, shameful, or too much, wasn't a threat to be feared, but a doorway back to yourself? This isn't about acting on every impulse or chasing pleasure for its own sake. It's about pausing long enough to ask, what have I buried and why? What parts of me have been silenced, not because they were dangerous, but because they didn't fit the version of me the world approved of? This is the beginning of that journey, and it starts not with answers, but with a single, honest question. There's a part of you that doesn't speak in words, but in tension, in impulses, in silence. You don't talk about it with friends. You barely admit it to yourself. And yet, late at night, when the distractions fall away, it stirs. A feeling, a flicker, an image, half-formed, raw, unfiltered, and a little unsettling. We like to believe we're in control of our desires, but are we? Carl Jung didn't think so. He believed that when we repress something, especially something as instinctual as sexuality, it doesn't disappear, it doesn't dissolve, it transforms. Into what? Compulsion, dysfunction, confusion, that lingering anxiety you can't explain, the urge you keep fighting but can't seem to silence, that split inside you that you feel but can't name. See, not all of our sexual impulses are about lust. Some are about power, or fear, or surrender. Some are rooted in past wounds we've never fully understood. Some come from places we've never dared to explore. And the more we ignore them, the louder they get. It's not about becoming slaves to our impulses. It's about realizing that repression doesn't protect us. It quietly runs the show behind the scenes. So the question is, are you truly choosing the shape of your life, or is a buried part of you choosing it for you? We grow up learning what's acceptable and what's not, what's appropriate to feel, what's okay to want, and slowly, without even noticing, we start dividing ourselves. We keep the parts that win approval, and we bury the parts that don't. The sexual shadow is made of exactly those buried parts. It holds every desire you were told was too much, every fantasy you judged, every impulse you pushed down because it made you feel ashamed, dirty, or unworthy. And here's what nobody tells you. Repression doesn't make those parts go away. It just makes them louder in silence. It shows up in subtle ways. You might feel emotionally detached during intimacy. You might confuse performance with love, giving just enough to seem connected but never enough to feel truly seen. Or maybe you chase pleasure, not because it fulfills you, but because it distracts you from the numbness, from the loneliness, from that quiet voice that says something's missing. And when we hear that voice, we often think, I must be broken. But you're not broken. You're divided. And that division between who you are and who you were told to be is what's robbing you of joy, of presence, of real intimacy. It doesn't happen all at once. It builds slowly, quietly, until one day you can't feel much of anything at all. And that right there is the real cost. Not dysfunction, but disconnection. The split doesn't begin in adulthood. It starts much earlier, usually in childhood. It begins the first time you feel something powerful in your body and someone shames you for it. Or worse, goes silent. No explanation, no support, just a wave of discomfort that makes you believe something about me is wrong. Maybe it was a parent changing the subject when you asked a curious question. Maybe it was the look on their face when you expressed a natural impulse. Or maybe it was being told in no uncertain terms, we don't talk about that. And so, without even knowing it, you internalize a message. This part of me is dangerous. That moment, small as it may seem, becomes the blueprint for your inner division. You learn to perform, to be the good boy, the pure girl, to show only what's acceptable and bury the rest. But what gets buried doesn't disappear. It festers. It hides beneath adult behaviors, shaping how you connect, love, and trust. You start to believe, if I express this part of myself, I'll be rejected. If I feel too much, I'll lose love. And it's not irrational. It was protective, once. But now, as adults, those protective patterns often keep us from the very connection we long for. So the real question becomes, are you still living by a story your child self wrote just to survive? Have you ever found yourself in a relationship that looked perfect on the outside, but felt hollow on the inside? Or maybe you keep attracting the same type of person over and over again. Different name, different face, but the same emotional outcome. And deep down, you can't explain why. Carl Jung would say, you're not choosing from the present. You're choosing from a blueprint, one shaped by fear, by trauma, by culture, by silence. Many of the choices we make in love aren't choices at all. They're reactions, echoes of early wounds and unspoken beliefs like, this is what love should feel like, or this is all I deserve. So we seek what feels familiar, not necessarily what feels fulfilling. We end up in relationships that feel emotionally safe but not alive. Or we run from people who stir something deeper in us, because that depth feels too vulnerable, too raw, too dangerous. And this is how repression works. It creates a double life. On the outside, you may seem stable, thoughtful, even emotionally intelligent, but inside, there's noise, confusion, longing, fantasies you don't understand, desires you try to silence, feelings you're afraid to name. Your body still remembers what your mind tries to forget, and the longer you ignore that inner truth, the more exhausting it becomes to perform who you think you're supposed to be. So ask yourself, are you truly choosing your love story? Or are you just reenacting an old one on repeat? You can have the job, the relationship, the house, the calendar full of plans, and still feel absolutely empty inside. So many people walk through life performing stability, smiling when they're supposed to, saying the right things, showing up, functioning. From the outside, it looks like they've made it, but inside, they're numb. Not depressed, necessarily, not broken, just disconnected. That's what repression does. It doesn't just silence your sexuality, it silences your spark, the part of you that creates, that dreams, that feels. When you bury one truth, others go with it. Your creativity fades, your spiritual curiosity dims, even your sense of meaning begins to blur. And the worst part is, you might not even notice at first. You call it adulthood. You call it being responsible. But really, it's survival. It's emotional exile dressed as maturity. And the toll? It's not loud, it's quiet, slow. It's the fatigue that sleep can't fix, the smile that feels heavier with time, the dull ache of living a life that looks right but doesn't feel right. So ask yourself, are you truly living? Or are you just managing the performance? So, where do we go from here? If performing stability leaves us numb and repression robs us of our inner fire, how do we return to something real? Carl Jung didn't believe in simply indulging the shadow, but he also didn't believe in silencing it. He pointed towards something far more challenging and far more liberating: awareness. Not action, not avoidance, just presence. Sitting quietly with the parts of yourself you were taught to fear. Asking the questions most people never dare to ask. Who told me this part of me was wrong? Where did I learn to hide this? What if I just felt it, without judgment? You see, the goal isn't to let your shadow run wild. It's to stop pretending it's not there. Because when you bring your shadow into the light, gently, honestly, it begins to shift. What once felt like guilt becomes understanding. What once triggered shame becomes clarity, and that's where real power lives. Not the kind of power that dominates, performs, or pleases, but the quiet, grounded power of a person who is no longer at war with themselves. You stop chasing intimacy, you stop sabotaging it, you begin to embody it. Because you're no longer looking for someone to accept you, you've started accepting yourself. So ask yourself, What would change if you stopped hiding and started listening? Here's the truth most of us were never told. Your power doesn't come from perfection, it comes from presence, from honesty, from the courage to finally stop running from the parts of you that make you uncomfortable. When you begin to integrate the shadow, especially the sexual shadow, you don't lose control, you gain clarity. Because that energy you've spent years trying to suppress, it doesn't disappear. It's been waiting to be reclaimed, transformed into something meaningful, something creative, alive, rooted. And this is where real healing begins, not by forcing yourself to be someone better, not by denying what you feel, but by learning to listen without shame. The shadow, when acknowledged, becomes a bridge to deeper connection, to authentic intimacy, to the kind of presence that doesn't need to prove itself because it simply is. You stop living in fragments and you start living in full. And that shift from shame to strength isn't about becoming someone new, it's about coming home to who you always were. Before the silence, before the masks, before the world taught you to hide. So maybe the question isn't, how do I fix this? Maybe it's, am I finally ready to face it? With love, not fear. Sometimes love doesn't die because of a fight, a betrayal, or some big dramatic moment. It dies quietly. It fades in the silence, in the small disconnections, in the eyes of a partner who no longer feels seen, even when you're right there in the room. When we don't integrate our shadow, especially the parts tied to desire, vulnerability, and fear, it doesn't stay hidden, it leaks. It slips into the way we touch, the way we avoid, the way we no longer reach for each other. We go through the motions of love, saying the right words, sharing the bed, showing up for the milestones, but the soul of it, it's missing. Because real intimacy can't exist without presence, and presence can't exist where you're hiding. You might still be kind, still loyal, still doing all the right things, but without emotional aliveness, love becomes maintenance, passion becomes memory, and connection turns into routine. Not because you stopped caring, but because you stopped showing up. Not physically, emotionally, spiritually. The most heartbreaking part, your partner may not even know what's wrong, but they'll feel it. They'll feel the wall, the absence. The energy that once said, I see you, replaced by something polite, distant, and hollow. And in the end, relationships don't fall apart from chaos, they dissolve in the quiet. Not from too much conflict, but from not enough truth. Carl Jung didn't just see sexual energy as biological, he saw it as archetypal, a symbolic expression of the life force itself. It's not just about attraction or intimacy, it's about vitality, creativity, expansion, the energy that pushes you forward in life, that sparks ideas, passion, movement, growth. But when that energy is repressed, when we deny it, shame it, silence it, we don't just lose pleasure, we lose access to ourselves. The price isn't always immediate. It shows up slowly, like fatigue you can't explain, a heaviness in your thoughts, a dull ache in your days. You call it burnout, you call it overthinking. You tell yourself you're just tired, but what you're really experiencing is disintegration. Not because you've done too much, but because you've gone too long without feeling. When we disconnect from our deeper instincts, we don't just lose connection to others, we lose the spark that makes life feel meaningful. So the question becomes, what if your exhaustion isn't from effort, but from avoidance? What if the energy you're craving isn't gone, it's just trapped in a part of you you've been too afraid to feel? In a world obsessed with perfection, performance, and appearances, wholeness is rebellion. Because true healing doesn't come from fixing yourself. It comes from facing the parts you were told to hide, from turning toward the shadow, not to be consumed by it, but to understand it. Carl Jung taught that what we repress doesn't just disappear, it grows in power. But when we stop running, when we sit with it, really sit with it, something begins to shift. We stop performing our lives, and we start living them. That's the power of integration. You don't become someone new, you reclaim who you were before the world told you who to be. The sexual shadow, once a source of shame, becomes a source of wisdom. Your desires no longer control you, they guide you, and instead of living in fear of what's inside you, you begin to move with it, to listen, to learn. This is where authenticity begins, not in the absence of struggle, but in the willingness to stay present with it. And maybe that's the most radical thing you can do in this world, to show up fully, not as a version of who you should be, but as the whole of who you truly are. Your shadow is not a flaw. It's not a sickness. It's not a stain that needs to be scrubbed away. It's a signal, a reminder that beneath all the silence, the masks, and the confusion, you are still whole. You've just been divided. Trained to believe that being good meant being disconnected from your deepest instincts. But the longer you hide your truth, the more it costs you. It costs you clarity. It costs you connection. It costs you yourself. You lose your vitality, your ability to feel deeply, to love fully, to create freely. And the tragedy is, you might not even notice it slipping away. Until one day you wake up and wonder why everything feels muted, why joy feels far, why you're surviving but not really living. That's why integration isn't just healing, it's homecoming. It's the moment you stop apologizing for being human, the moment you stand in front of the mirror and say, "This is me," without shame, without fear, without the need to hide. And if something in this message stirred something in you, if there's a part of you that's been quietly waiting to be reclaimed, don't leave it in silence. Drop a comment below. I'm ready to reclaim what I buried. Because this isn't just a video, it's an invitation to come home.